It's the TVA ledge version of Beyond the Basics, and I'm here with ledge expert Terry Bolton. We're on Kentucky Lake. It's mid to late June, and that means most of the fish are off on the ledges. And there's kind of three baits that people generally use when ledge fishing: the big crankbait, the spoon, and the worm. And Terry's going to show us some of the worms he likes to use when ledge fishing.
That's right. It's summertime, and one thing about ledge fishing, a worm is always a staple. They don't get tired of it. And I have here a 10.5-inch Trigger X hammer worm and a 7.5-inch ribbon tail Trigger X worm. And these are two basic things that you need to excel at to become a good ledge fisherman. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use those today.
What makes a worm good on Kentucky Lake? What is it about that worm?
Well, I think a lot of times, the fish, during high current flows, the fish are real active, but once you get later into the summer, the current doesn't run as often, the rain dries up, and the fish lay on the bottom, it gets hot. And a lot of times they just want a slow presentation, and sometimes they want a fast presentation. We'll talk a little bit about that today, but the worm's very subtle, and it's something that doesn't put out a big flash or vibration or something always that they don't get a negative response from it. That's why I think a worm's always good.
Okay, let's take a look at your worm setup, how you rig it, what kind of rod, reel, line, that kind of stuff.
That's right. I'm going to start out first with the 10.5-inch worm,
okay,
which is a worm that I used a lot this week. And I start out, I've got a 1/2 ounce VMC tungsten weight with a 5/0 VMC hook. And you can see this pretty long shanked hook. I've got this on 12-pound Suffix fluorocarbon line. And I usually like to use a 7-foot medium heavy to heavy action rod because a lot of times you're fishing this worm at 20, 25, 30 feet. So you want to use that longer rod to help take up slack and get a good hook set in these fish. But I always used to, I never hardly used a 1/2 ounce worm, and it seems like these fish have kind of gotten deeper and deeper as the years have gone on. And so now a 1/2 ounce weight's always been a staple, but I usually start out, there's two ways you can rig it. A lot of times you see how this worm's got a bend in the tail. A lot of times I'll rig it where the bend is in line. Now you can rig this hammer worm two ways. You can rig it with the flat side or with the ribbon tail, and I'll basically push it up onto that offset and then hook it back in just like that, and there's my setup right there. And that's for the big worm.
okay.
And then I have the same similar setup for the 7.5-inch worm, except I have a little bit lighter 3/8 ounce tungsten VMC weight with about a 4/0 VMC rigging hook. And I'll rig it basically the same way. You see how that bend is in the tail? I'll just come through about just into the bend, and I'll push it up onto that worm just like so, and then insert it back. And as you can see, when I get that rigged right, I've got where that water, when it flows, it'll flow right across that tail, and whenever I move that worm, it'll cause that tail to move.
Is it as simple as bigger worm for a deeper ledge, or is there more to it?
The big worm always gets all the publicity, but I have won many tournaments. I kind of get to, 90% of the people out here, or 100% are throwing a 10-inch worm. But a lot of times you can throw the old standard 7.5-inch worm, something they haven't seen in a while because everybody's throwing a 10-inch worm, and you can go right behind people and catch fish that they've missed. I mean, just because it's not 10 inches long doesn't mean it won't catch fish. Okay, there's basically two ways I like to fish a worm. Now I've started off here with this 1/2 ounce 10-inch worm, and I'm sitting here in about 28 feet of water throwing up on top of the ledge in 16, 17. And a lot of times I'll just kind of start out by just slowly dragging the worm. And I've got this 10-inch worm here with this 1/2 ounce weight. And that's basically how I'll just kind of start out, just dragging it real slow along the bottom. Just barely, a lot of times you might even want to keep your rod to the side, kind of fish it like a Carolina rig, and just kind of barely pull it along, let it edge over those rocks. Now, a lot of times, if the fish are active, I'll actually throw the worm out like this and lift and drop the worm on a semi-slack line. I'll cast it out, and a lot of times I'll feed line out to it because I want it to go as straight to the bottom as I can, because I want to be sure I work that ledge from the top all the way out to the boat. And what I'll do is a lot of times when I make sure the worm's on the bottom, I'll pick the worm up, I'll pick the slack line up, and I'll lift it. And as it goes back, I'll watch that bow in that line, and I'll pick it up again, just like so, and I'll watch that bow. And a lot of times those fish will hit it on the fall. just like this. Just lift, pick it up, and let it, and what I always call it, like set it back down. Lift, let it go back down, and I'm watching my line the entire time that I'm doing this. What we have here, it's a ledge, it's about 15, 16 foot on top, and it drops off out here into 24, 25, and out here beyond me is the actual Tennessee River channel, and it makes a point back here behind us, and you have a creek coming out, then you have the intersects with the main river channel. And when the current flows on Kentucky Lake, it flows backwards. In other words, it flows south to north instead of north to south like it does everywhere else. And what it does is it'll push current, it'll push food or bait up onto that front face of that ledge, and that's usually what you want to look for. I was sitting there talking, dragging that worm real slow right along the bottom, and I just felt a little tap, tap, tap. So, you know, just remember, whenever you're out here ledge fishing in the summertime, pick up a bag of Trigger X 10-inch hammer worms and throw it out here on these ledges and fish it real slow. You'll catch plenty of bass. And I'm Off Pro Terry Bolton, and this is Beyond the Basics.